But thank you so much for being here. I'm actually really excited about this panel here today because I think it's sort of one of the most interesting transformational sectors.
This is Mahesh Kolli, one of the two founders of Greenko Group. Now, we started around 15 years ago. So we probably are in the what I call is third decade cycle of what I've been hearing about climate change and ESG and different types of terms used. I've started since 2004 to now. So we've seen different global approaches to looking at this from different countries' perspective. I think from us as Greenko, when we started, the tagline was, how do we empower sustainability? And for us, sustainability, and you'll be surprised, even we have a sustainability officer. So it doesn't mean that we see sustainability as only through the lens of power. But the big picture for us was, I think, we always looked at sustainability and some of this climate debate is what I used to hear in Europe and other markets had a different narrative through the lens of OECD markets, right? So what I hear through Paris Climate Summit, a lot of that, coal versus net zero, we believe all of that is a little bit more driven by the OECD market thought process. For us, we had a strong long-term belief that India's approach to sustainability is neither a risk or opportunity. That's opportunity India has without having to only link it from a climate perspective. It's an opportunity. Doing anything sustainable India is all about becoming carbon free, which means we can become free from imported carbon sources, improving the quality of life across the country. So to improve quality of life, we have to improve the per capita consumption of everything we do. We are probably 1/3 of the world average across all major consuming indexes, right? Whether it's power or steel or anything we consume. So we strongly believe that, in the last 15 years, if we can deliver what I call as economic parity solutions, whether it's in terms of power or what we're now doing in energy storage and what we plan to deliver through hydrogen and more into industrial decarbonization is what we are working towards, to deliver, let's say, steam, to deliver chemicals. So all of that, great opportunity for India to be with the natural resources we have and the way of the cultural way of life and entrepreneurship we have, we can deliver not as a target to achieve, not because there is a climate summit out there which we have to achieve, but it's a natural, large, once-in-a-generation opportunity. Like the Industrial Revolution had opportunity for the OECD markets, this is a massive opportunity for markets like India, not as a response to some climate summit, as a response to the resources we have, right? So as a company, we are about 7,000 plus megawatts of assets in operation. We are building over 50 gigawatt hours of energy storage. This is the largest energy storage globally ever built. And that's transformational nature because that will enable many things to happen. That will enable, we can deliver what I call as lowest cost carbon-free energy in the world. I believe the new globalization is about which countries and which economies can deliver lowest cost carbon-free energy. And I can say that we will be, as India, delivering that lowest cost carbon-free energy, because once you have lowest cost carbon-free energy, you can deliver, lowest cost green steel, lowest cost green aluminum, any industrial processes outcomes. And that's the new globalized world we see. It's not about just low cost supply chains. It's about low cost, low carbon as a combination which countries can deliver globally. And lastly, we have been working with Government of India, Ministry of Education, across all the IITs in India. We started with IIT Hyderabad, building a school of sustainable science and climate technologies, because we see sustainability as a science. There's a lot of new materials, chemistry, and fundamental science that needs to happen, not purely corporate behaviors. A lot of new IP and technology we need to believe. So we're contributing through building a new graduate, undergraduate, and master's programs in sustainable as a science and technology. And the last fun part we're doing is, we believe to create more awareness on the ability for decarbonized world. We're conducting Formula E in India first time. So we'll be creating a lot of awareness through that Formula E platform.
Thank you, Mahesh, and thank you all of you. Actually, I think the one thing that's been prominent from everything that you said is the optimism. I think there's genuinely a very strong belief system in the opportunity that's being presented by sustainability and climate action. Mahesh, just to sort of follow up with you, we spend about $160 billion on energy in this country. The primary push is towards renewable generation. What can we do beyond generation? I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you're also doing at Greenko in that regard.
Sure, I think that's the big transition India has. So the energy transition was always seen through the lens of renewable energy. And if you see in the last 2 decades of India's renewable growth has largely been an obligatory driven. It's only because of renewable power obligations being enforced upon the state utilities why renewables have grown, not fundamentally as a solution that can solve energy demand or industrial energy needs. So that's the fundamental transformation India can do. And of that 160 billion, only about 30 billion is really what I call as power market spend. 130 billion is spent on the molecules. The electron market is 30 billion, molecule market is 130 billion. And all the big renewable focus has been about 3 to 4 billion in that 30 billion electron market. So that's one big effort we've been working on. How do we make this electrons reliable and valuable to help the demand needs of the country? So once you make this green electrons reliable and what I call as flexible, it's able to go deeper in the different markets to decarbonize those markets. So obviously, one big market has been industrial markets, because industrial markets have not benefited much from renewables, because they need continuous, reliable source of energy as a primary way to operate, whether it's steel, whether it's copper, aluminum, refineries, and all of that, right? So, so once we made energy from renewables reliable through energy storage, now India has about 80 gigawatts of captive consumption. All of that can now benefit from transition. And so industrial decarbonization is first time happening, probably at a faster pace than what's happening around the world, without subsidies, without those fancy multi-billion climate bills, which we hear in US and other countries, purely as a function of economics and technology maturity. But the bigger transition India will do is molecule transition. About of the 130 billion, India imports around 25 billion of natural gas. Of that 20 billion, it goes only to make hydrogen. And India imports another 10 billion worth of ammonia and other forms of nitrogen sources through urea. And so that's another big transition. That probably be 5 times larger than what India was doing of renewables as an obligatory energy put on utilities, transitioning in making green molecules and making other derivatives of green molecules, from green hydrogen to ammonia to methanol and other derivatives. We believe we have that transition can be 5 times larger than what we were doing in the power sector.
And that's really exciting. And actually, the hydrogen conversation, we'll come back to you, Prabodha, on that. But before that, I did want to ask you, Madhulika, because ITC has really been a leader in sustainability for decades now, and I wanted you to just give everyone a sense of how you built the business case, back then. How did you sort of introduce those technologies at that time, given how nascent they were? What was sort of the impetus that drove that forward within ITC?
Yeah, so I mentioned a word when I was introducing was competitive advantage or competitive responsibility. That's what you will hear our chairman, quoting every time. So responsible competitiveness or responsible capitalism is what he calls. And I think I'll just probably give an example to the hotels business that ITC has. So ITC started the hotels business as a diversification strategy some 4-5 decades ago, but they were late entrants into the whole business of hotels, because there were 2 already iconic chains which were there in India.
And both you and Mr. Jindal, I think, have come out very strongly about the opportunity for green steel. So thank you for that. I think that was really helpful. But Mahesh, I wanted to ask you actually, this is an opportunity to sort of give some advice to Indian industry, because another big gap beyond the R&D piece is really the financing, right? There is a massive sort of transition that has to be financed. There's a huge gap in terms of investment. How would you advise Indian industry to structure those investments or raise investments for this?
Again, I think what's fortunate about India is, as I said, is decarbonization and the investments and the energy transition is naturally not, as I said, we're not displacing something, right? And in most OECD markets, renewable energy is displacing something else. It's displacing coal or displacing gas or displacing carbon, because they're all hardly wired with carbon infrastructure, right? The great opportunity in India is that what we have is what we already have, but we also need to grow in every sector almost twice in the next 5 to 10 years, right? And that's a great opportunity that the new infrastructure we're putting in place, the next 300 gigawatts for power sector, or the next 50 gigawatts for the steel sector, all the new energy infrastructure can happen already at economics which are competingly lowest point globally in India. And so that's where where the value proposition is a lot more fundamental to the market and economics, not purely driven by the net zero goals. So when we talk to investors, it's very easy to get them on board that we're not competing with already trying to displace $1 hydrogen. The Indian market today is already absorbing outside the steel sector. The big part of India is probably the third largest hydrogen consumer in the world today, and we're already absorbing hydrogen at $2.5 to $3 per kg, right? And so we don't need to walk towards a $1 competition. Right? If we deliver hydrogen at $4, we're already making that new refineries and the new gas blending and those kind of use cases. So that's the slightly different approach. When we talk to global market for capital, we are not seeing it as we're having this opportunity to demonstrate it as a new value-added infrastructure across different market segments. And which is part of the reason why the benchmarks, because average cost of most carbon sources in India, which India does not have many, we import a big part of it. Our average cost is very high. In the G20 countries, India is probably the top 2-3 cost of power being highest, right? Or cost of any energy source being highest. So when we bring solutions with carbon-free energy models, we are actually very competitive to the market. Like this is one interesting case study we did with another steel company called ArcelorMittal. We are actually giving them 24/7 renewables at the same reliability of a coal plant, hour by hour, 24/7. Right? In most other markets, it's an expensive proposition. You need subsidies, you need tax credits. In India, it's an economic, natural proposition, an inflation-proof proposition for the next 25 years. So the investment community is able to put India in a different basket, not as an obligatory basket what they do in other countries. And so we've been able to attract green bonds. We probably issued the largest amount of green bonds in the region, with about $4 billion of green bonds. And whether it's equity or there's one interesting thing is we kind of reduced our dependency on general multilateral type organizations. We don't need that kind of capital. There's a commercial capital available because the returns and the risk and the value proposition is so compelling naturally that we don't go to any more World Bank, or we don't go to Asian Development Bank, or we don't go to. I'm just saying they need to compete commercially now, because commercially the market is able to support this transition because the fundamentals are very clear. Yeah.
Thank you. How we define and describe that conversation, you're absolutely right that adaptation doesn't get sort of the due that it deserves and it requires. And I think that's really a potential, leadership opportunity here in India, and one that, we're seeing a lot of corporates like yourselves start to define and push forward. I think the second aspect on trade-offs, as we have this conversation around technology and innovation, we really have to have that very complicated conversation also around, what is, one input versus another, or one output versus another. What are we prioritizing, and how are we making that conversation a very inclusive one? Because it isn't always. So I think you've really hit the nail on, I think, two very important aspects that we have to consider. I'm going to just request the audience to get their questions ready, because we're going to come to you in about 5 minutes. But before we do, I want to come back to all three of our panelists. And Mahesh, maybe we can start with you. But I wanted each of you to talk about the need to break silos across across industry, across research institutions, as well as, of course, the startup sector. How do we build a more cohesive ecosystem? Tell us your thoughts on this. Please share if you are in your own organizations or your own capacities working on this. We'd love to hear how each of you may be addressing this.
It's clearly interesting times. I think this problem can only be addressed. More than problem is that this opportunity can be larger in a collaborative ecosystem. That's how we started to behave. We're now collaborating with industrial partners, other energy companies. I talked about IIT as a tool to create new science and materials for this transition. So right from sport like Formula E to IITs to industrial partners to energy companies. We're collaborating with NTPC, we're collaborating with other IPPs. I think to really, end of the day, achieve this, the final objective is from the final solutions. How do we make it economical? Because for India, sustainability and decarbonization, as the panelists mentioned, is an opportunity that it can deliver low-cost solutions and products, right? It's not about demonstration from a carbon footprint alone. It also naturally, in India, decarbonization means low cost. Decarbonization means inflation-proof. Decarbonization means more reliability. Probably in the last 3 years, we could rely on sun shining more than coal or gas coming from Middle East and Australia to India, right? So there's definitely interesting barriers we have crossed, technical barriers, commercial barriers, and through the collaboration, we're able to accelerate. The key word is acceleration, right? That accelerating sustainability, decarbonization, energy transition efforts is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for a market like India. Like as I talked about industrial revolution in the past, we are in probably the fourth industrial revolution phase. India can take a lead because we have less legacy to deal with. We can set the right architecture and framework for our economy through collaborative models.
Thank you. I think collaboration and innovations are very important, and it not only helps in business growing, it helps in decarbonization. So let me give my thought. I think innovations I'll give, has to happen in two ways. One is that innovation, what you do in your day-to-day work within your industry, and then how do you collaborate for the innovations happening outside of industries. And I think when I looked at JSW logo, I was fascinated that they have written better every day, and that's trigger that you need to do innovation what you do every day, and that lead to a culture of innovations what you do inside. But only when organizations innovates within themselves, within breaking silos and coming together within the organizations, I don't think that's going to be sufficient enough. And that is where collaboration is required. Collaboration not only within the organizations, outside the organization, with the technology supplier, within the country, outside the country. And that is the approach even we have taken, that we do collaborate with technology suppliers for the process improvements. We tie up with research and development organizations outside. Not only that, we are focusing on our own research and development. We are tying up with IITs, with all the research institute in India. And somehow I also have an opinion that actually we Indians are better in doing innovations. You might call it jugaad, but I think we are very innovative in mind. Only thing is that we have to provide the right infrastructure, right circumstances, right atmosphere to make this happen, prosper, and become world class. So our objective is to how we can make our own innovation world class and be a leader in the sector, rather than always looking for the technology outside. So that is where again collaboration within the organization within India is so important for us.
That's fantastic. I love it. So we have the fourth industrial revolution. We have, collaborative jugaad, and we have the need for inclusive innovation. So I think that's really sort of a brilliant set of, I think, strategic advice as well as sort of inputs from you. So with that, I just want to go to the audience. If you have any questions for our panelists, now is the time. We'd love to hear from you. Yes, the lady in the sari.
Yeah, hello. Thank you so much for enlightening us. My question is very simple. When you invest to go for carbon neutral or carbon emission, how do you really come to know indeed that your carbon emission has reduced? What's the measurement? How do you detect that?
Yeah, I think clearly, we've already seen the regulators, we've seen, I think, SEC has also recommended that the corporates, along with their financial statements, need to also provide their emission statements. So I think it's well-known global practices and processes and standards now in place that, in fact, SEBI is also coming up with a similar approach that, along with the quarterly results, please present your emission results as well. So because there are standards, there's a lot of standardization now in calculating emissions.
It's a simple question of
goes for carbon offsets and all. How do you know exactly whether it's
on the offset? That question, that's a controversial question.
Yeah.
Okay.
So how do you measure it? That indeed the emission is going down. I understand your emission.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about.
I think it's a good point in a way. I think globally now the regulators are looking at it closely. When corporates talk about carbon neutral, talk about renewable energy, or talk about offsets, what it really means, because in most times it is corporate jargon to meet certain brand approach. So for example, and I strongly believe the word like carbon neutrality and renewable energy, they are not really reducing emissions. They're reducing emissions, but they're not eliminating emissions. So it's a lot of greenwashing in that space by corporates because it is for a different branding approach. But there is where the regulators are now coming very strongly. They've now, in Europe, a few regulators have fined a few banks calling their financial products carbon neutral. This is happening in US as well. So yes, it has to be, regulators now has to be very strong about what it means to really reducing emissions. And some of them, I would say 80% of what some of this is about branding. It's not really emission reduction.
Yeah, hi. My question is to Mahesh. If you can highlight to the crowd in terms of your initiatives, especially on the intelligent renewables, and how you want to enable 24/7 deliverable power. And when will those first industries will actually come in India, which will actually be using those technologies, are not supposedly expensive, but achieve the right competitiveness and be sort of global leaders of green materials out of India? If you can throw some light on that. Thank you.
Sure, I think it's all happening now. We have engaged with a lot of industry players to make this happen. So we've been working on this concept called long duration storage, which can enable renewables to be available 24/7 or in the form the market and the demand needs. And that is where the missing link was. Historically, renewables is not a firm power, not a flexible power. but the demand, whether for industries or for the market, needs to be either firm or flexible. So through solving through long duration storage, we've enabled that at economics on par with the current source of energy production through coal or gas in most of the industries. So as I said, we're delivering contracts now for the next 12 months. So by end of 23, India can see first of its kind carbon-free energy contracts executed, and as I said, that has a very deep impact on industrial decarbonization, molecule creation, all of that stuff.
Thank you. And we're just going to take this as the last question, and then we're going to wrap up.
So my question is regarding the power sector. So I wanted to get an understanding how you see the power sector, specifically the thermal one, evolving in next 10 years with respect to energy transition, or will it be kind of a technological improvement in the sector?
I think both of you can start.
I think the power sector will have always a mix of energy sources and different technologies participating. As I said, for a market like India today, we are 400 gigawatts, of which coal is 250 gigawatts, renewables is 100 gigawatts. As a country, we need probably 2 times that by 2030, right? So, and we need different types of energy mix, some providing reliable energy, some providing flexible energy, some of it will be obviously green. So I think at least for India, having a lot of domestic coal, it'll still be continue to be part of our energy mix in a long time to come. But as I talked about, some innovations and breakthrough happening in long duration storage, the power sector energy transition is now becoming more, all the new energy that's getting added is becoming through the last 3 years, 85% of the energy added in the country has been through renewables. The next 5 years, it will be similar. But we will still have the backbone of the country, which is coal, at least 40-50% of it for the next 10-15 years.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I want to say thank you to my panelists. I think it was a fascinating discussion as we thought it would be. And thank you again to EDF and the entire team for, inviting us all here today. And thank you, of course, to the audience for listening as patiently as you have. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.